I woke up in a hospital bed, heart still weak, and my entire life was gone. While I was fighting to stay alive after a massive heart attack, strangers were moving into my house, the house I built with my wife over 14 years. Confused, I called my wife Vanessa. No answer. Then I checked our bank account. Empty. That's when the truth hit me harder than any heart attack ever could. My wife had sold our home, drained every penny we had, and vanished with her personal trainer. I was betrayed at the lowest point of my life, alone, broke, homeless, and recovering from surgery. But what Vanessa didn't know was that I had a secret, a hidden safe behind our bedroom wall. And inside that safe was everything I needed to turn her perfect betrayal into her worst nightmare. If you think marriage is built on trust, think again. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of calculated revenge. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss how I turn the tables. Because sometimes protecting yourself means staying 2 steps ahead of the person sleeping next to you. I used to believe I had it all figured out. At 42, I was a senior software engineer in Boston, living comfortably in a beautiful suburban home with my wife, Vanessa. 14 years of marriage, 14 years of what I thought was partnership, trust, and love. Vanessa was everything I had once dreamed of, charming, ambitious, and full of life. We met at a tech conference after party where her energy pulled me in like gravity. She worked in marketing back then, and together we built a life that looked perfect from the outside. But the thing about perfect is, it's often just a well-polished lie. After my first marriage ended in betrayal, I swore I'd never be blindsided again. That experience taught me one harsh truth: even the people closest to you can have secrets. So when I married Vanessa, I made quiet preparations, not because I didn't trust her, but because I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that again. I installed a hidden safe behind a painting in our bedroom. Nothing dramatic, just a precaution. Inside, I kept $50,000, $1,000 in cash copies of my personal asset documents and a prenuptial agreement Vanessa had happily signed years ago. She joked about it back then, saying, "We'll never need this." I wanted to believe her. But I also installed something else, a hidden camera system. After my first wife's affair, I learned how easy it was to miss the signs until it was too late. So I covered the master bedroom in my home office. Not to spy, just to protect myself if history ever tried to repeat. For years, I didn't think about it. Life moved on, routine, comfortable. Vanessa said she loved her fitness journey, spending more hours at the gym, often mentioning her personal trainer, Jason. I didn't think twice. Why would I? I was busy with work, deadlines, promotions. Looking back, the signs were there. The late nights, the sudden interest in controlling our finances, the distant look in her eyes when we talked about the future. But love makes you blind, or maybe hope does. Then came the heart attack. It was a normal Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for a client call when a sharp pain shot through my chest. The next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance, sirens blaring, unable to breathe. 3 weeks in the hospital, tubes, monitors, doctors, explaining how lucky I was to survive. Vanessa visited the first few days, brought flowers, smiled for the nurses, but soon the visits stopped. She blamed work, stress, said she was handling things at home. I believed her. Until that phone call from my neighbor shattered everything. "Michael, I don't know how to tell you this," he said, his voice hesitant, "but there's a moving truck outside your house. A family is unloading furniture. They said they bought the place last week." I remember gripping the hospital bed rail, my heart monitor beeping faster. "That's impossible." I whispered more to myself than to him. Panic doesn't come in waves, it hits all at once. I tried calling Vanessa straight to voicemail. Again and again. Then I logged into our bank account from my phone. Zero balance. I checked our savings. Also empty. It felt like the walls of that hospital room were closing in on me. I wasn't just fighting for my health anymore. I was fighting to understand how the woman I loved could erase our life together overnight. Lying there helpless, I realized 2 things. First, Vanessa was gone. And second, this wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated move. But what she didn't calculate was me. Because even though she thought she'd taken everything, I still had one card left to play, and I was about to use it. The moment I was discharged from the hospital, I wasn't thinking about recovery. I was thinking about survival. I had no home to return to. No money, no answers. I went straight to my friend Daniel's apartment. He was the only person I trusted enough to call when my world collapsed. When he opened the door and saw the look on my face, he didn't ask questions. He just let me in. For hours, I sat on his couch, replaying every conversation, every moment, with Vanessa, searching for clues I'd missed. How long had she been planning this? How could she look me in the eye, knowing she was about to destroy everything we built? The next morning, I called my lawyer, Alan. I explained what little I knew about the house sale, the empty accounts, and Vanessa disappearing. Alan's voice was calm but firm. Michael, this isn't just a divorce, this is fraud. He pulled the property records, and that's when we saw it. My forged signature on the sale documents Vanessa had rushed the sale through while I was sedated in the cardiac unit, using a power of attorney document I never signed. It was a clean-cut case of forgery, but the money from the sale, over $1 million, was already transferred. Gone offshore, most likely. Alan told me we could act fast to freeze any remaining funds, but we needed solid evidence of intent, proof that Vanessa didn't just make a desperate decision, but orchestrated a deliberate con. That's when it hit me. The safe, in all the chaos, I had almost forgotten about the one thing Vanessa didn't know existed. I turned to Daniel. I need to get back into my house. He raised an eyebrow. Michael, it's not your house anymore. I know, I said quietly, but there's something inside that can change everything. We drove to the neighborhood that used to be mine, seeing strangers' cars in the driveway, kids' toys scattered on the lawn. It was like watching someone else live my life. I knocked on the door. Heart pounding, a middle-aged couple answered, looking confused but polite when I explained who I was. Thankfully, they were understanding. Once I told them I wasn't there to cause trouble, just to retrieve something personal hidden in the wall, they let me in. Walking through what used to be my home felt surreal. The walls were painted a different color. Furniture I didn't recognize filled the rooms. But when I entered the master bedroom, I saw it, the painting still hanging exactly where I left it. I removed it carefully, revealing the small safe embedded in the wall. My hands shook as I entered the code. Click. Inside was everything I had hoped for: the cash, the documents, and the hard drive. Back at Daniel's place, I connected the drive to my laptop. The hidden camera footage loaded, showing months' worth of recordings from the bedroom and office. At first, it was mundane: Vanessa getting ready for work, folding laundry, but then there he was, Jason. What started as subtle touches and whispers quickly escalated into something far worse. I watched numb as Vanessa and Jason laid out their plan in chilling detail. They laughed about my health, calling my heart attack perfect timing. They discussed how to forge my signature, how to liquidate assets, and how they disappeared to the Bahamas with everything I owned. It wasn't a moment of weakness, it wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated betrayal. By the time I finished watching, I wasn't angry. I was focused. I sent the footage to Alan immediately. This is exactly what we needed, he said. With this, we can freeze the funds, press charges, and make sure they don't get away with a dime. For the first time since that phone call in the hospital, I felt a spark of control returning. Vanessa thought she left me powerless, but she underestimated the man she married, and now it was her turn to panic. There's a moment when pain turns into purpose. For me, that moment came as I sat in Alan's office, watching him draft the legal motions that would flip Vanessa's world upside down. This isn't just about getting your money back, Alan said, his eyes scanning the documents. It's about sending a message. People like Vanessa and Jason, they don't expect consequences. Within hours, Alan's team filed emergency orders to freeze the proceeds from the house sale. The bank accounts Vanessa used to funnel the money, both domestic and offshore, were flagged. Every transaction was traced, every loophole closed. But that was just the beginning. Alan contacted the district attorney, handing over the footage, the forged documents, the entire blueprint of Vanessa's betrayal. The DA didn't hesitate. Criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy were filed within days. Arrest warrants were issued. All we had to do was wait. But waiting doesn't feel like victory when you're sitting alone in someone else's apartment, staring at the wreckage of your life. The nights were the hardest, lying awake, wondering how long Vanessa had been pretending. How many times she smiled at me while secretly planning to destroy me. I wasn't just grieving a marriage, I was grieving the version of myself that believed I was safe. 3 days later, Alan called. "We've located them," he said. "They're flying back from the Bahamas tomorrow." I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear but from something colder. Determination. This was it. There was no turning back now. I wasn't the man begging for answers anymore. I was the man delivering them. The next morning I met Alan at the courthouse. We reviewed the final paperwork. Civil suits for damages, asset recovery, and punitive compensation. Everything was lined up. As we walked out, Alan glanced at me. "You sure you're ready for this?" I nodded. "I've never been more ready." That afternoon, I got the call I'd been waiting for. "Michael, they're in custody." Vanessa and Jason had barely stepped off the plane when federal agents closed in. I could only imagine the shock on her face, the woman who thought she was untouchable suddenly in handcuffs at the airport. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet, because justice isn't instant. It's a process, a slow grinding machine. And I was prepared to see it through to the end. Over the next few weeks, the reality of what Vanessa had done became public. The media caught wind of the case. Wife sells home, while husband hospitalized in $2 million fraud scheme. Jason's gym fired him the same day his mugshot hit the news. His reputation was ruined overnight. Vanessa's family, they disowned her. Friends stopped calling. The glamorous life she thought she'd secured crumbled faster than she could have imagined. But while their world was collapsing, I was rebuilding mine. I rented a small apartment across town, modest. But it was mine. I focused on my recovery, both physical and mental. Every day I reminded myself that surviving wasn't enough. I was going to come out of this stronger, smarter. The court dates were set. Vanessa and Jason were denied bail due to flight risk. Alan assured me that with the mountain of evidence we had, conviction was almost certain. Standing in that courtroom for the first hearing, I saw Vanessa across the room. She looked nothing like the woman I married. Tired, disheveled eyes filled with fear. For a brief second, I wondered if she felt any remorse. But then I remembered the footage, her laughing about my heart attack, calling it perfect timing. No, she didn't regret what she did. She regretted getting caught, and that's when I knew there was no saving this. No forgiveness, no closure through words. The only closure would be justice, and I was going to make sure she faced every ounce of it. Revenge isn't about rage, it's about precision. Sitting in that courtroom, I knew that emotions wouldn't win this battle. Strategy. What Vanessa and Jason thought they had written the final chapter of my life. What they didn't realize was that I was just getting started, armed with evidence, a sharp legal team, and the patience to watch them unravel. Alan and I mapped out every step. First, we secured the financial freeze with the court's approval. Over $950,000 from the house sale was locked away before Vanessa could touch another cent. The accounts she tried to hide offshore, flagged and reclaimed. Next came the civil suit. We weren't just demanding the return of my assets, we were going after punitive damages, emotional distress, financial hardship, reputational harm. Every sleepless night, every dollar spent rebuilding my life. Alan's team calculated everything down to the cent. By the time we filed the lawsuit, totaled nearly $2 million. But the real weapon, the one Vanessa never saw coming, was the prenuptial agreement. When we got married, Vanessa was so confident in our future that she signed it without hesitation. Buried in that agreement was a strict infidelity clause. If she ever cheated, she forfeited any claim to my separate assets and was liable for damages. The video footage didn't just prove fraud, it proved months of infidelity. There was no room for debate. No loopholes. While the civil case moved forward, the criminal charges tightened around them. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft. Each carrying years behind bars. Vanessa's lawyer tried to negotiate, offering weak excuses that she was desperate, that she acted out of fear when I was hospitalized. But Alan shut that down with a single line: "Desperate people don't book vacations to the Bahamas." Meanwhile, Jason's life fell apart even faster. Without a job, buried in legal fees, and facing felony charges, he realized too late that Vanessa wasn't his ticket to a better life. She was his downfall. Weeks turned into months as court proceedings advanced. I stayed quiet, focused, refusing to let bitterness consume me. I wasn't out for revenge driven by hate. I was out to reclaim my life and make sure they paid for every calculated decision they made. Then came the plea deal, facing overwhelming evidence. Vanessa's attorney approached us. She would plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. Alan looked at me. "It's your call." I thought about it, about the years we spent together, about the betrayal, and then I nodded. "Let her plead, but I want full restitution, every dollar. And I want Jason to face trial alone." Vanessa took the deal. She pled guilty to fraud and forgery, agreeing to a 5-year prison sentence and full financial restitution as part of the civil settlement. Everything she owned, cars, jewelry, savings, was liquidated to cover damages. Jason, on the other hand, gambled on his chances in court, and he lost. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. When the verdict was read, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled because it was finally over. I walked out of that courthouse a free man, not just from the legal battle, but from the weight of betrayal that had nearly crushed me. With the settlement finalized, I used part of the recovered funds to buy a new home. Nothing extravagant, just a place where I could truly start over. I also made a decision. I wasn't going to hide this story. Too many people think betrayal like this could never happen to them. I thought the same until it did. So I began speaking publicly about financial protection in marriage, about the importance of safeguarding yourself no matter how secure you think your relationship is, because trust is important, but preparation is survival. Vanessa and Jason thought they were smarter than me. They thought they could take everything and disappear into paradise. But what they didn't know is that I'd already prepared for the storm before they even saw the clouds. The day of sentencing felt different. It wasn't anxiety, it wasn't anticipation, it was closure. I sat quietly in the courtroom as Vanessa stood before the judge. Gone was the confident, polished woman I once knew. She wore a plain jumpsuit, her hair tied back, eyes hollow, like she finally understood the weight of what she'd done. The judge's voice echoed through the room. "Vanessa Thompson, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You will also fulfill the terms of the civil settlement, including full restitution to Mr. Michael Thompson." Vanessa didn't cry. She didn't look for sympathy. She just nodded, defeated. When they led her away in handcuffs, she glanced at me for a split second. I held her gaze, not with anger, but with finality. There was nothing left to say. A week later, Jason's sentencing followed. Unlike Vanessa, he still tried to posture, standing tall, jaw clenched like he could intimidate the outcome. But the judge wasn't impressed. "For your role in this calculated scheme," the judge declared, "you are sentenced to 7 years in prison." Jason's mask cracked. Then the reality of prison time hit him harder than any workout ever could. As he was escorted out, he didn't dare look my way, because deep down, he knew he was never in control. The fallout extended far beyond those courtroom walls. Vanessa's reputation was destroyed. Her name became synonymous with betrayal in every social circle she once thrived in. Friends distanced themselves, her family humiliated by the scandal. Cut ties completely. Jason's downfall was just as swift. His certifications revoked his professional career, obliterated. The man who once strutted around like he owned the world was now just another inmate number. But for me, the aftermath wasn't about watching them fall. It was about rebuilding. I moved into my new home, a modest place across town. It wasn't the house I had poured years into, but it was mine. A fresh start, free from shadows and secrets. I focused on my health, both physical and mental. Cardiac rehab became a routine, but so did something else: advocacy. I began sharing my story not out of spite, but as a warning. I spoke at financial seminars, community events, even online platforms, about the importance of protecting oneself in relationships. People often ask me, didn't it hurt to relive it? Of course it did, but pain loses its power when you turn it into purpose. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, deliberate. It was from Vanessa. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to read what she had to say. Inside was a short note. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I regret underestimating you more than anything else. There was no apology for the betrayal. No acknowledgement of love lost, just regret for losing a game she thought she'd already won. I folded the letter and tossed it in the drawer, not out of bitterness, but because it no longer mattered. Vanessa's words couldn't touch me anymore. Neither could the memories of what she did. The truth was, I didn't need an apology. I had justice, and that was enough. As time passed, I found peace, not because I forgot, but because I reclaimed control over my life. People often say, revenge doesn't fix anything, but they're wrong. Revenge, when done right, isn't about destruction, it's about balance, about making sure those who think they can take without consequence learn that every action has a price. Vanessa and Jason paid theirs. And I walked away not as a victim, but as a survivor who refused to stay broken. It's been over a year since that chapter of my life closed. Sometimes when I sit on the porch of my new home, I think back to the man I was before everything fell apart, trusting, comfortable, and convinced that betrayal was something that only happened to other people I know better now. Betrayal doesn't always come with warning signs. It doesn't announce itself with flashing lights. Sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table. Sometimes it kisses you goodnight. What happened to me wasn't just about a house or money. It was about realizing that even in a marriage that looks stable, you can still be standing on quicksand. But here's the thing. I don't live in fear. I live prepared. I've learned that protecting yourself isn't pessimism, it's wisdom. Love doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means being strong enough to hope for the best, but smart enough to safeguard against the worst. People often ask me if I regret installing that hidden safe. If I regret being cautious, my answer is simple: that safe didn't just hold cash and documents. It held my escape plan. It held my future. Without it, I wouldn't be telling this story. I'd be another man left with nothing but heartbreak and debt. Now I share my experience because I know there are others out there. People who trust too easily, who believe it could never happen to me. I was one of them. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: trust is earned every day, not assumed. And while love is worth giving, your security, financial, emotional, and personal, should never be handed over blindly. I don't hate Vanessa anymore. She taught me a lesson I'll never forget. And Jason, he's just a footnote in a story about greed and stupidity. As for me, I'm healthier, wiser, and stronger than I've ever been. Not because I avoided betrayal, but because I faced it and came out standing. So if you ever find yourself questioning whether you're being too cautious in life or love, remember my story. It's not paranoia to protect yourself. It's survival. And sometimes survival comes down to the secrets you keep and the plans you make before anyone thinks you'll ever need them.